Well, hello, good afternoon. It's a great pleasure today to welcome Magnus Johansson. Magnus, how are you?
Just fine, thank you.
Wonderful, thank you. Thank you for agreeing to talk to me this afternoon. And I'm going to read a little introduction I've prepared, and then I have also a set of questions for you. So today's topic is mining in Sweden, and Magnus Johansson is a geologist at the Geological Survey of Sweden, and he gives expert opinions in public application reviews, and he works with integrating raw material supply as part of physical planning at municipality level. He holds an MSc in physical geography and another one in geology, both from the University of Hanover in Germany. And he worked there for several years in the Mineralogical Institute, and then he returned to Sweden in 2007. Since his return to Sweden, he worked for some 10 years as industrial mineralogist, and this is with SMA Mineral AB, where he was involved in planning and exploration of quarries, of mining applications, and also in environmental impact and reclamation efforts. He has also worked as geoscience and environmental consultant, among others, at the municipality of Arvika and SWECO. In 2019, Magnus started his own geoscience consultant business, working with investigating quaternary geology and subsoil stability below mining and tailing dams. Magnus is also the chairman of the board of Geosektionen, the geoscience branch of the Swedish Association of Professional Scientists, and is a member of the expert panel of the European Federation of Geologists, EFG, in particular focus on minerals and their sustainable use. In addition to talking Swedish and English, Magnus speaks several other languages, and I'm a little envious about that, I must admit. And he speaks fluent German and Icelandic, and well, he worked in Germany and in Iceland, and of course in Sweden as well. You have a fantastic career, Magnus. I'm really impressed, and it's a great pleasure to have you here today. So,
thank you very much, Valentin.
Oh, well, it's my honor. So, are you ready for a few questions for our sustainability course?
Sure, shoot.
Okay, great. Well, Sweden is the #1 producer of iron in Europe, with several large world-class deposits in mainly the very north of Sweden. And I wondered, how do you rate Sweden's role on a global level in terms of iron production?
2019 was an all-time high for the Swedish iron ore production. It was nearly 40 million tons of crude iron ore. And after processing, we had some 30 million tons of concentrated iron ore remain due to the very high grades we have in Sweden. Today, Sweden accounts for 90% of the European iron ore production and is the most important European country producing iron, and has been so during the last century. In Germany, there's a term called Schwedenstahl, Swedish steel. It's a well-known term defining high-quality steel. And still, Sweden is quite a small global player compared to the world total production of 2,300 something million tons of crude iron ore. So in comparison, you have gigantic day pits in Australia, Brazil. Each of them bypass the Swedish national iron ore production in tonnage. And the costs of mining at over 1 kilometer depth in Swedish mines is surely much higher than in a day pit. We have the mines in Malmberget and Kiruna, for example. But due to the high grade and pure ore in the Swedish deposits, compared to the low grade at these day pit iron ore mines, and the large extent of automation in Swedish mines, the Swedish production is still very competitive. Also, one may consider that, for example, LKAB production, they do not only deliver iron ore, they enhance the value of the project, delivering ready-to-use pellets to the iron works and smelter plants, and thus creating a higher revenue from the mined ore.
Very good, very good. So this is quite impressive, 90% of the European iron production. So, wow. And LKAB is a well-known company here in Sweden, certainly. And I always wondered a little bit, I mean, how come that iron production is mainly in the north of Sweden, in Lapland? Is there geological constraints, or is this purely societally constrained? Because I'm aware that there is some iron ore deposits also in central Sweden, but they have not been mined for several decades. Could you maybe give us your view on that?
There are several reasons for this. First one is, of course, geological reasons. We do have several large and very pure iron ore deposits that have been discovered in the very north of Sweden some 100+ years ago. Historically, the main Swedish iron ore mining region, that is to say the mining region in general for Sweden, for many 100 years was located in the area of Bergslagen in central Sweden.
Yes.
Here we have another geological setting, another geological domain, and numerous deposits of different metal ores that have been mined since the early Middle Ages. Compared to that, the northern Swedish mine fields are quite young in exploitation terms. And we have well-known Swedish mines such as Garpenberg, Falun, Sala silver mine from this Bergslagen area. And today, most of these mines in Bergslagen are closed, with some exceptions. We do have 3 active mines there. Generally it's often more difficult to develop new mining projects in regions where mines are presently not active due to public opinion and acceptance. That is also a reason that projects in the north are ongoing. There are other openings in central and also south of Sweden, but you always fear what you do not know. In the north, the cities of Malmberget and Kiruna, they were erected at the places where they found the ore, where the mines started up. Mining is a part of the society. It offers workplaces and delivers tax revenues. This was also the case in Bergslagen. But in the steel crisis in the 70s, and very many of these mines were closed. The world ore prices were very low. Production didn't pay off. And there was also a very large number of mines compared to the ones today. They were very small or quite small. There have been projects trying to start up some of these, Dannemora mine, for example, but it is a long way to start a mine as well as restarting a mine to get the production running, and there are high costs involved. So that there are several different aspects, and the social constraints, they do play a role, but that's not the reason why the big Swedish iron ore mines are in the north.
Okay, I see. This is very interesting. I'm quite fascinated by this topic because I did a small bit of work at Grängesberg, which is a former iron ore mine in Bergslagen, and it was closed in the 1980s. And I heard all sorts of opinions. Some people say there's still a lot of iron ore, but Yeah, societal constraints are limiting the possibilities to reopen it. Other people say it's too expensive to reopen it because all the shafts are flooded since it was closed in the 80s. But then there's a small company now that's exploring the possibility in earnest to reopen it. So let's see what happens. But I can see that geologically as well as societally, the north is very attractive to mine iron. And LKAB is doing very well there, I think.
Yeah, many of these old mines, they do still have considerable reserves. So it is a real possibility to reopen them to make use of these resources. So we will see what will happen in the future. I think some of them will surely reopen.
That would be interesting. Personally, I would find that very interesting to have a look again at, say, below the surface in Grängesberg. I only seen the surface outcrops. But I have a few more questions for you. So if you don't mind, I'll push on with our little question catalog here. And now we've touched on iron. Sweden is famous for iron production. But there's, of course, other metals that are produced in Sweden at the moment. And they are economically important as well. What other metals are currently relevant in the Swedish economy?
We do have a lot of base metal mining. Then we speak of copper, zinc, and lead. We also mine noble metals such as gold and silver.
Mm-hmm.
And Sweden contributes a considerable amount of the EU base metals, silver and gold production. Compared to the iron ore, the grades in base metals are, however, much lower. So close to 50 million tons of these non-ferrous ores were mined in Sweden in 2019, and that resulted in some 420,000 tons of ore concentrates. So yes, this production of these metals is of big importance for Sweden and for the EU. Though Sweden is not the leading producer in all noble and base metals, except for zinc and lead. Poland, Finland, Bulgaria, Spain, and Ireland are also strong players in one or several of these commodities.
That's, of course, extremely important. Actually, after I formulated these questions, the EU has released a new directive. Here we are even more strongly encouraged now than in the previous directives to find raw materials, to find metal resources within the EU in order to become more economically resilient on the raw material scale. So Sweden will probably see an increase of mining in the future because of this richness in deposits. But my next question here is actually going back a few steps. I'd like to have a little look with you at the history of mining in Sweden. So historically, Sweden has a very long mining tradition, and it's reaching back to medieval times and probably even earlier. So how did mining work back then, and how did it shape Sweden's history and economic past, and potentially even having influences on the present? Would you be able to say a few words on that, Magnus?
For Swedish economy, the mining and ore production and ore export is and has been quite a relevant factor in driving technical development, influencing the rise of the world famous Swedish industry companies, well-known company names. And this has developed the country and our society as we know it today. Without the exploitation of these rich natural mineral resources, I think Sweden of today would have looked quite different than we see it today. And many of these old deposits, they have also exploited very rich ores. And the techniques of that time was hand sorting of the ore. It was possible. The grades were high. And this explains the vast number of old but often very small mines all over Sweden. And still the mining technology was elaborate and at that time top of the line, high-tech solutions for the centuries of action. And mining technique and knowledge was imported from, among other, Germany, which is quite obvious when looking at many German and international words in mining terms and expressions in Sweden. And due to this rough sorting in the old days, many of these old mines have tailings with the ore grades are very interesting today. Some of these tailings have been reprocessed with modern techniques to exploit them better. And one can also say this might be also a part of a solution treating old mining tailings. Often these old tailings may cause environmental problems, partly because of the inadequate processing at that time. You still have a lot of ore content in it. That is to say, lead, zinc, iron, some of those metals you don't want too much in the environment. And partly because of ignorance of the environmental effects in older times, I think the people just didn't know better at that time what the effects would be. Today, we are much more, we have the technique, we have the knowledge to do it in a much cleaner way. And there may be a possibility to reprocess and handle these old tailings in a better way.
That sounds very interesting. I understand the environmental threat that comes from these old tailings, and also I guess mining was less regulated in the old days. So even accepting the lack of knowledge about certain processes, there was also no kind of real regulations as we would have them today. So reprocessing them and ensuring that the leftovers are actually stored in a safe way, in a long-term safe way, that would be really important. So maybe I'll just add very quickly, there are some very famous mines here, certainly in central Sweden, and you mentioned them before, Falun and Sala. They must have been quite substantial in terms of economic support for Sweden's government in the past. I think, if I'm not mistaken, I heard that Falun was delivering the most of the copper for Europe's economy in the kind of late medieval time, and this gives us a feeling for how important these mines were back then. And I guess Sweden has economically profited from mining these deposits at the time quite enormously, I think.
Yeah, I think that the Swedish, the country of Sweden and all these, the nation as such was surely financed from a lot from the silver production of Sala silver mine, the copper from Falun. And as you said, I mean, in the 17th century, 2/3 of the world production of copper came from Falun, and that is really something at that time.
Yes, and only I think the discovery of silver and of course copper as well in South America after the Spanish conquest has really changed the game. But up to then, Sweden was the key player, I understand. So wonderful. I love a bit of historical perspective on these things, but given the long mining history in Sweden, and also the huge scale, massive operations in the north, could you give us a sense of how much might be left? Because some people argue that there is a peak for almost everything. Some people think that peak copper might come in a while and that we're running out of things to mine. What's your perspective on that? Is there enough left for Sweden to really invest into mining?
I'd say yes. Sweden still has large unmined deposits, partly explored, partly unexplored. And there are several different aspects of this. During mining, you usually don't explore the deposit 100% before you start. You'll need to have a reasonable confidence that a mining project is economically viable and that the reserves will last for a considerable time so that the investment is possible. But detailed exploration is usually limited to the ore volumes that will be mined in the next 5 to 10 years, maybe, something like that.
Okay.
And as this detail mapped ore is mined, there is always continuous exploration and work discovering and estimating the quality of the grades of new reserves on a rolling scheme. So you mine volumes to take them away, but on the back end, you keep discovering new volumes and adding them to the known reserves, and also defining the quality of the estimation. The quality of the estimation gets better and better, and therefore, in many cases, the known reserves at average might stay the same over time. Still, if you mine volumes, but you still have new discoveries piling up. And also, there are many known deposits. You know that there is a deposit, but it is not fully explored, or perhaps it is explored but not economically viable at the moment. But if resources go scarce, prices will go up, and that will change the game for quite some deposits still. And you mentioned earlier this European Raw Materials Initiative, the planning and handling of the raw materials we need. We need to make sure that we can access them, that there is no supply chain that is broken. And here we have the geopolitical and economic reasons that come into the discussion. We mentioned the global market price. It plays a significant role, of course, but also such factors as this mentioned European consideration on critical raw material supply. Shall the European Union rely on these long and sometimes unsure supply chains with imports from China, Australia, other countries? Or should we use the natural reserves available within the EU? It is a question about ethics. You can talk about work labor safety regulations or public health care or pension systems. In some mining countries, they are non-existent or poor. And from these countries, we today import high-tech metals we need for our society. Congo is one country that has been mentioned in the news with quite some unsafe working environment, and it's a very, very large player for some commodities.
That's very interesting. Whoa, you covered a lot there. I mean, where do I start? Yeah, first of all, I kind of agree with you almost entirely that working mining conditions in Sweden are, I guess, a lot more developed than in many other countries. And Congo has a somewhat bad reputation, I guess, because of many small-scale operations. And small-scale operations, they might not always stick to the accepted standards, or they may not be held to these standards, certainly not the European standards. And then, of course, also they might not continue after the mine has been exhausted with reclaiming the land in a proper way. So these are things that are very, very important. And I think you're right. Europe can do a much better job in this context, certainly at the moment. And it's also interesting about the reserves that you mentioned. And there's this notion that Kiruna, the mine in Kiruna, is going deeper and deeper. And I guess when they started the mine in Kiruna, they didn't think that they would go that deep. At the moment, it's the deepest point in Sweden is actually in the Kiruna mine, and I visited that a little while back. Some of the miners get married there because it's such a intriguing place to be so deep below sea level inside the mine. It's a bit warm down there, I found, but so yes, and they're still going deeper. As long as it's safe, you can do that, I guess. So and this was of course not anticipated when the mine was opened, or even a few decades ago. I don't think that it was thought about that they would go so deep. So there's more. I think you're right with this, and this is very comforting that Sweden will have many decades in the future to mine more materials.
There are also, if you talk about the mining depths, Swedish mines are deep, surely, but technically, mines for going down to 3 or even 4 kilometers is possible. Of course, it's difficult, but yeah, it's possible. And for Sweden, we will see. Of course, you mine the easiest accessible ore first, and then you have to develop the techniques to go further. But I think our mines will last quite some time still.
That's good to know. That's good to know. So no peak copper in the near future in Sweden, and that's comforting. Moving beyond iron and copper and lead zinc, current developments in technology, particularly in green technology, require us to think a little bit more about what's known as critical metals, rare earth elements, for example. And I wondered, the EU, of course, is very much after finding those within the EU territory. What do you think is Sweden's potential to help with delivering critical metals or rare earth elements to the market in the European Union in the coming decades?
Sweden and Finland can, opposed to most European countries, offer a diverse portfolio of ores, all because of the geological setting of Scandinavia. And Sweden has recently discovered large REE deposits, that's rare earth elements. We also have graphite, vanadine, cobalt, and other critical raw materials needed for a green transition. Significant deposits of these elements are quite scarce in the European Union. And if you think about the need for these minerals, it's you compare green energy. Think about a wind turbine. It will generate the green energy. It needs raw materials such as steel, copper, aluminum for the tower, the electrical wiring, limestone and rock aggregate for concrete groundwork, of course. That's what you think of first. But for these windmills, you need some 350 kilos of neodymium and other REE metals. And in addition to all other generators from geothermal and water power energy plants, as well as electrical motors, all what we need for the for this green transition and change to electrical power and electrical power generation. We need these REEs. Without them, we just can't do it. And this amounts to very high demand of these critical elements, inevitable for electrification and the green transition. And most of you will have heard about the Northvolt startup in Skellefteå in North Sweden. aim is to produce batteries that, and this will demand a large quantities from a row of critical metals and critical raw materials also. These batteries you'll need for all the electrical cars and whatever machinery you need to move on electrical power. And why Skellefteå? Why, or even why Sweden in the first place? Partly because we do have suitable mineral deposits in the north of Sweden. Among others, cobalt and graphite. You need that for battery production. And a factory location near these deposits will decrease emissions and carbon footprint from transports of these metals and ores. And I mentioned Congo earlier. It's about 60% of the world production is coming from Congo at the moment, and you need that for metal alloys, batteries, many other things. One thing is that in the vitamin B12 you do have cobalt in the vitamin. It's part of the structure. And
I have no idea. Okay.
And the question is, do we want that raw materials, the raw materials that we need, do we want them to be produced in this way, from Congo, imported from somewhere? Sweden has the deposits that definitely could be mined in a much more societally and environmentally sustainable way. And there is, for example, one of the big findings that is also a big discussion at the moment is the Norra Kärr deposits near Lake Vättern. And that is also, it's perhaps the biggest REE deposit in Europe. But of course, it is a discussion of pro and contra. And there is at the moment a process of a permitting process, and the outcome is not, or it is very unsure at the moment.
I see, yeah. This is very interesting, and what you mentioned about battery production in Skellefteå, this is, I'm quite fascinated by this because I visited Chile about 2 years ago, and I was impressed by these enormous salars, these salt lakes, and of course there's great hopes there that a large amount of the lithium required for battery technology will come from there. But just thinking of the fuel costs to deliver the lithium from the high Andes all over the world to production sites in Asia, like China and Japan, to Europe, whoa, it will almost offset the advantages we're gaining from producing the batteries in terms of carbon footprint. And this is very worrying. So I think finding some possibilities to mine this in Scandinavia would be quite important. And now I hear that there's plans to mine pegmatite deposits in Finland and potentially also in Sweden to deliver lithium there. So if lithium and cobalt could be sourced locally, then of course the fuel costs would be dramatically lower, not to mention the conditions that would hopefully be also very good in Europe, as opposed to certainly some African countries. And no, I think this is very interesting. So I sense that you are quite hopeful about Sweden making a contribution towards the change towards green technology in the future.
I think Sweden does have a significant role to play, firstly because of the resources available, especially in the context of supplying the European market at first. Secondly, because Sweden is a well-known mining nation. We have mining history. We have well-known big mining companies, and also an industry cluster behind it. So there is a high the development of mining technology and high-tech equipment is very active in Sweden. So from various reasons, I think Sweden has a role and responsibility also to shoulder this role.
That is very well put. I think you hit the nail on the head there. I think Sweden has a responsibility to make a contribution there. It's not just about that it has the possibility, but it has actually a responsibility, because anything else would be a little irresponsible, sourcing it from far away at potentially high transport costs and uncertain production conditions. Now, we've talked about existing deposits, known reserves, and in many of the kind of mined areas, the reserves may be larger than initially thought. But I wondered as well, of course, talking about unknowns is always tricky, but is there a large potential, in your opinion, for finding completely new, unknown deposits? And the reason I'm asking this is I'm working with a PhD student in Lithuania, and she's working on a deposit, an iron ore deposit, that was discovered by geophysics. It's not visible at the surface at all. And now they have drilled into it, and at certain depths, they indeed found this geophysical anomaly, and it turns out to be a Kiruna type iron ore deposit. Broadly speaking, yes, I'm not quite sure how big it is, but my colleague there, the PhD student, she's working on that, and hopefully we'll learn more. So we are processing some samples from there. But what's your feeling? And there's no right or wrong answer, I guess, but what's your feeling about unknown deposits in Sweden? Do you think there is a good chance for this?
As you mentioned, just this this new finding or potential new big reserves of iron ore. It's new technology, and there are new deposits discovered every now and then. Quite many exploration companies are active in Sweden, and even with this long mining history, there is still a big potential for new discoveries, especially in the old mining regions, where some potential resources, such as REEs in the Bergslagen area, for example, and also elsewhere, they have simply been overseen. They were not at all relevant. I mean, 200 years ago, who cared about REEs, or 100 years ago?
That's very true. Who was interested in neodymium?
Yeah, it was just crap. They put it on the waste heap, and they wanted the iron.
Very true. Very true.
And it was just not. It was just not relevant or valuable at that time. So with this demand for these rare metals increasing immensely in the last decades, the focus of exploration is changing from traditional ores to such as iron, gold, or copper, changing to the REEs and other critical elements, and creating an urge for more exploration in that direction. But the new exploration technology will surely lead to new findings. I mean, in the old days, you walked across the land, you could have a compass to find iron ore near the surface. As magnetite is magnetic, you will sense it notice it if you have a compass and walk by a vein. In the old days, they were quite skilled. Some ores changed the environment, they changed the soil from the rocks below. And so the plants growing in special environments sometimes show that the characteristics of that environment. And so could the early explorers in medieval time find interesting areas either by stumbling upon a rock with this pure ore, or finding vegetation that hints on that, well, here might be something, let's dig and check it out. And if we look around today, we have geophysics, we can drill thousands of meters deep, geomagnetics. There are many different methods of discovering ores that were invisible for thousands of years. And today we have the technology to re-evaluate areas of earlier exploration and earlier mining, as well as going into greenfield and finding ores where no mining was ever made earlier, but today we find the ores.
That sounds very promising. I mean, particularly in light of what we call Sweden's responsibility. So hopefully that these methodologies that you mentioned will indeed recover some new deposits. So I think this is extremely important. But now I'd also, my last two questions, like to touch a little bit on some of the obstacles, because mining is not universally popular, let's put it like that. Many people have reservations about it, despite the critical need for many of these elements, the critical elements in particular, for the energy transition, for the green technology. And here my question is to ensure that Europe can really stay on the ball and push these green developments, green technologies further. What are the biggest obstacles in your view, the biggest challenges faced by Swedish mining? So imagine we would really, or one would really find a new deposit. What would a company have to go through in order to open up this deposit for mining? Could you comment a little bit on that, Magnus?
We do have the suitable geological setting. We have existent mining industry clusters for technology development. We have the relevant deposits and large potential on new findings. So right now, challenges that are tackled are electrification, automation. For example, the Aitik mine in the north, they have electrical mine trucks lowering the emissions significantly. But that is a very small obstacle, I'd say. It's a technical challenge. It's nothing, no big obstacle. The real thing would be public opinion and permitting processes.
Yeah.
In Sweden, we have this system of permitting processes and public reviewing of applications. And it's a very long and quite costly way to go. Presently, there is an ongoing examination of possibilities to improve these processes, as companies need to invest a lot of money and time, and the outcome is very unsure. That will certainly hamper exploitation of deposits that are discovered if you do not have a real you do not really know what will be the outcome. Do I have a good case? Can I get investors for this project?
Yeah.
Or is it just very unsure what will be the outcome? You need to have some kind of stable frame so that the companies can develop this and can make a good case that they can mine this in a sustainable and environmentally sound way, and also make it economically viable. And that is at the moment difficult, and public opinion, of course, often is a problem. and especially in regions where there are previously no mines. Perhaps I can show a slide of
Sure, go ahead. Yeah.
Of a project. And there.
Yes, I can see you. Yeah, I can see the slide, I mean.
Yeah, and I go one slide back. Here we have Sweden, the very south of Sweden, in Skåne, at the lowermost part of this map. It's well, there are many people living here in Malmö, Lund, the cities near the Strait of Öresund. But Skåne is also a part of Sweden which has a lot of agriculture. You have good soils, you have fairly flat landscape, and you can grow very good crops down here. And you can see here some markings on the map with exploration permits, and this shows that there is activity down here in Skåne as well. You have the exploration permits spread over parts of Sweden, partly reflecting the areas of previous mining or present day mining. But here in Skåne, you have had some mining during the Second World War, where you had problems importing different commodities because of the war. Earlier, you also had some, for example, coal mining in Sweden, and that was in the south, where you have the sedimentary deposits, the sedimentary rocks suitable for that. But that coal mine is it's closed long ago. But if we look a little bit further on this project here, we have the Scania alum shale. And alum shale is a deposit of clay stone. It's a dark clay, and represents an event in the geological history of lack of oxygen in the ocean, and therefore very much organic material has been preserved. In this alum shale, you could and we also did extract petroleum products by distilling it. The organic content is such high that you can do it. And during the Second World War, we did in Sweden to ensure that we had enough gas for fighters and ships and cars. And but it also the properties of this alum shale, it also contains a lot of metals. It is enriched in metals, and you have TCE. It's technology critical elements. Okay. It's a saying of encompassing these different types of critical metals. And this project in Skåne, it's called Scandinavian project. It's a green field. I mean, you can see the picture. It's a farming country, farming area. The deposit they are interested in is vanadium and also battery metals. And vanadium is also it's needed in metallurgical processes and quite a valuable metal. Here we are planning subsurface mine. It's not a day pit, but it's a big issue with a public acceptance. It's an area where they don't have the experience or the tradition of mining. what you don't know, you don't like. You have this, the NIMBY, I don't want anything in my backyard.
Yes.
And the permitting process for this is unsure, I would say. With a subsurface mine, you could do the mining and not have the big effects on the surface. But of course, it is an industrial process. You will have you will have transports and so forth. The contents of this project, I mean, you see the ore grades of 0.5, 0.8% of vanadium oxide. That's a very low grade. Of course, you have other elements in it, but you get a lot of waste material. And that is often the problem. Also, the processing of the mined ore, you need a space, you need areas for sedimentation of slurry and such. Often, for example, at the Garpenberg mine in central Sweden, they backfill the mine, they dig tunnels, they mine the ore, and then they backfill the mined volumes for stability reasons with the waste or the waste material, the unusable material. That has several advantages. First, you get the stability. You don't get any tunnels caving in. Secondly, you have the room to deposit the material. Mm-hmm. You don't need to place it on the surface of the land, and such a method would be favorable in this case. But it is always a discussion and also a process. What do we really need? Do we need, I mean, there are nature protection aspects here. You have social acceptance. You have the need for the industry. I mean, you want a cell phone, I want a cell phone, we both want a car. Where do we get it from? Well, yeah, it has to come from somewhere. And it is of course important that these places and these mines are chosen wisely, but the deposits, they are where they are. It's you can't change the place. If you have the geology, you may have the resources of this or that metal, but it is on that place. You can't just move it around. And so, of course, you may find other places and so, but it's you need to play with the cards that you have. And
that's a very good point you make. I haven't quite looked at it this way, because many people would like to argue that the mine should be somewhere else, and but of course you're absolutely right. It's easier to kind of move infrastructure and maybe even a small number of people, as opposed to moving geology. That's not so easy to do. I take your point there. I accept.
Well, in Germany, of course, there are both sides. It's difficult to judge here, of course. And
of course,
Germany, for example, Swedish energy companies had invested in lignite in Germany, brown coal, and there is in history, I mean, those deposits were vast, gigantic, and you needed to move villages to be able to mine it and totally change the landscape. And so it's good, bad. I mean, yes, you had the use for the lignite, but it surely did affect the landscape a lot. And you need to have all the aspects, both the social, the economic, the environmental aspects, and then make wise decisions.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I mean, of course, one has to be very smart about that, but it's potentially acceptable if you think of Kiruna, where part of the town is now moved because the mine is actually expanding. And once the population is in acceptance of that, because that's where the jobs are, then I think that's something that we must consider. Okay, Magnus, I think we can move to my very last question. And are you finished with the slide?
Yes, I am. I can try to.
Then I have you back on full screen. Thank you very much. That's great. It's good to see you. So yes, and my last question here before we close is really, I think there's a good case to be made that Sweden has a responsibility to mine, to provide some of these materials that otherwise have to come from far afield, that otherwise are likely mined under uncontrolled conditions to a certain degree, that are, well, it's the concept of conflict diamonds is well known, and effectively there's also conflict metals, let's face it, and that kind of thing. So we all also want to have a smartphone, as you say, and we want to kind of push green technology. So bringing all of these things together, I think a case is to be made that sometimes we might need to mine in places that are not necessarily getting everyone's acceptance. How can we go about to convince some people that this is what we really need to do in order to achieve these environmental goals, in order to, for example, reduce our carbon emissions in the future, to meet climate goals in the future? How can we convince people? It's an emotional topic, and it's very hard to get people to kind of see all these aspects. And do you have any ideas, any strategies that you would suggest in order to kind of get a public acceptance for some of these projects, an increased public acceptance?
It's a very difficult task, I'd say. Part of it is because of lack of knowledge. We do not really know, or we don't really understand what is needed for the society that we have today, how much material that is consumed, unseen, but still consumed to make all the things that we have all around us, the roads, the trains, the smartphones, the computers, electronics and everything. You need to get a better awareness of that. And part of this question is also that geoscience is not taught at schools. I'm a geologist, but my first geology lesson or anything that covered geology was at the university. At high school, at the gymnasium, I did not have anything about geology, rocks, about raw materials. Where do things come from? You just get them from somewhere. Well, it's you need to understand this, and some basic knowledge about this would surely help. Some countries in Europe do have geology as subjects in school, for example, Norway and Greece.
Okay.
And that is one brick in building understanding of what we really need and why we need it and how it all comes together. We need to understand what cannot be grown must be mined. We can grow our food, we can grow the timber to build houses, but we cannot grow chips for an iPad. We need to mine those elements and those materials, and the understanding here about the real high-tech life we live, we take it for granted, because it is our everyday life, but it is a high-tech society, and we need to stand up for the raw material consumption we cause, and ensure that the production of that is sustainable, and with a good ecological footprint, and not just come from somewhere, but it is a responsible production. And also it is one thing is if we just buy things and then use them a little bit, and buy new things, and it's always fun to buy more and more. We should use things a little bit more responsibly. The more computers we buy and change telephone every year or whenever, that drives the need for these materials. So every person is responsible for a very small part of this, but still responsible. And for Sweden, we should really be proud of the mining potential that Sweden can offer. We've forgotten about this. I mean, the mines built the Swedish society. They paid for the Swedish society in large parts. Of course, you also have the other natural goods, such as the forests. I mean, the timber industry is also a very, very big factor in Sweden, and has been for many hundred years. Yeah. But so it's of course it's not only mines, but it's a very important factor, and we should really recognize the potential that this has, and also acknowledge that there is a need for this, but it is difficult. It's really difficult to have a discussion about this, because feelings often are involved, and then it is difficult to have a rational discussion about what we really need, what do we not need, what can we do, what can't we do. Nature protection is surely needed, and mining in the old days was not clean. Still, in some parts of the world, is very, very dirty today. It shouldn't be. We can do better. But you have this image of mining industry as dirty and dusty and creating problems, and so it mustn't be that way. It shouldn't be that way. We need this industry, but the industry also needs us. We need to together make this setting as good as possible. But I think information, discussion, and education is part of it. But there will always be, I mean, democracy is always the decisions are made in different perspectives, and it's very seldom that you have everyone on one side, but there must be space for discussion. You must have the possibility to discuss and find suitable solutions that will get the best solution for the ones involved.
I can only agree with you, Magnus. I think you hit some very important points here. I think education is vital. We all need to accept that we might not have the full knowledge about the very complicated web of resources, and the flux of resources, and the flow of resources, and the flow of the economy as well, the money that pays for it, and the goods that we produce. I also think that we all need to keep an open mind. We cannot have one without the other in many cases, and the attitude, I want this but not that, is very difficult. I mean, there is often this scenario that the good comes with the bad and the bad comes with the good, and we might need to accept this in some cases by trying to minimize the bad and trying to optimize the good as far as we can. But of course, we have to accept that some price will have to be paid for the things we want. Well, thank you very much, Magnus. This was a very interesting session, a very interesting interview, I thought, and I'm more than confident people will appreciate that. In fact, I believe, hopefully, that some people who will watch this will get a better idea of what's at stake and what might be required and what is actually needed in order to push certain developments that we as a society really need to look at, like the green technology. And from that point of view, I'm really grateful that you took the time to talk with me about that. Magnus, thank you very much for your time, and this is greatly appreciated.
Thank you very much, Valentin. It was my pleasure. Glück auf.
Tusen tack. Glück auf. Bye-bye.
Bye.